Pass area encompasses a variety of spectacular scenery. There's the alpine beauty of Summit Lake, the swans swimming in Tern Lake, the towering peaks of Avalanche Acres, where there's no direct sunlight for 3 months each winter, the small bucolic community built on the edge of Trail Lake and the shores of Kenai Lake down to the Snow River Bridge. The forces of nature that shaped these sites took millions of years. Massive shifts of tectonic plates created mountains, huge glaciers advancing and retreating, rivers and creeks flowing for time immemorial, snow, rain, wind, earthquakes, avalanches, and landslides. The human history of the area began with Alaska Native hunters who sought moose, caribou, bears, fur-bearing mammals, and gathered subsistence foods. Most of these seasonal visitors were Dena'ina, traveling from settlements along the Kenai River, although more seafaring tribes from Prince William Sound also were attracted by the abundant game. Historians credit Norwegian Anton Ede with naming Moose Pass. Ede carried mail by dog sled from Resurrection Bay to Hope and the booming mining community of Sunrise, located on the western shore of Turnagain Arm. During the winter of 1903, Ede hired an Alaska native named Afanasi to break trail through the deep snow ahead of the dogs. Afanasi spotted a moose and took off after it in his snowshoes. When he came back empty-handed, he told Ede, "Moose Pass." Local lore says that Moose Pass got its name in 1903 from a cantankerous moose that wouldn't let the mail carrier's team of dogs go through. Local resident Ed Estes attributed the name Moose Pass to a 1904 observation by Nate White of the first moose recorded in this area. The narrow 8-mile pass from Tern Lake to Kenai Lake was the migratory path for moose to get to their winter feeding grounds at higher elevation mountain passes such as Johnson or Turnagain. The first non-native settlers were trappers and hunters. The community was established as the Hope Sunrise Gold Rush boomed and the golden beaches of Nome beckoned. The gold rushes brought in streams of fortune seekers offloaded from steamship in Seward. Most walked northward carrying heavy loads on their backs. Those bound for Sunrise, which briefly was the largest settlement in Alaska, hiked over the Resurrection Pass Trail. Those headed to Nome took the start of the original 2,300-mile Iditarod Trail at the north end of Trail Lake. Oscar Christensen and his partner, Mickey Nat, arrived in Moose Pass in 1909 and built a log roadhouse for prospectors heading north and as a supply point for local mining operations. There never were any large mining operations close to Moose Pass, but there were smaller operations, including one employing 20 miners. The two men also rented saddle and pack horses and boats to use on Trail Lake. In 1912, the Alaska Northern Railway was under construction and the station on Trail Lake was dubbed Moose Pass. In 1921, Leora Estes Roycroft and her 5 sons moved from Girdwood to Moose Pass, becoming the first family to settle into the community. A post office was established in 1928, and Roycroft, the first postmaster, officially named the town Moose Pass. The building of the Alaska Railroad from Seward to Fairbanks was instrumental in transforming Moose Pass into a full-fledged community. Construction of the Seward Highway, local mining, sawmills, trapping, limited tourism, and a hardy community spirit and ingenuity helped keep Moose Pass alive. The early spirit and pluck of the community that carries over to the present can be seen in the stories of early pioneers who worked together to help one another. The vibrancy of the community in 1939 shines in the pages of the weekly Moose Pass Miner. The mimeographed newspaper was a one-woman effort to promote Moose Pass and was an unusual mix of recipes, poems, local gossip, and statewide news, national events, support of the New Deal, and a fascination with the British royalty. Lois Allen came to Alaska seeking a career in journalism, and after a 2-year stop in Skagway publishing a newspaper, she migrated to Moose Pass, which seemed like a community with a future. Here's an article from the second issue of The Miner, dated November 17, 1938.
17 men from Moose Pass and Lawing held an old-fashioned Help Your Neighbor, B, at the Witt homestead last Sunday. Because Mr. Witt was taken ill before he had the new cabin finished, which he had spent the summer building, the Moose Pass and Lawing men volunteered to prepare the cabin for winter occupancy. The day was bitter cold, but everyone worked with will. A partition was built, the gables lined, chinking of the cabin was completed. A good supply of firewood cut, and other necessary work was accomplished. Mrs. Witt, Mrs. Lawing, Mrs. Smith, Mrs. Grease, and Mrs. Hunt prepared and served a bountiful dinner to the workers. There was chicken and bear roast, vegetables, salads, pies, cakes.
It wasn't all work, though. Helio's Roadhouse was the social center of the community and hosted a variety of entertainment, including the skit by the Pearl One Knit Two Club, as detailed in the May 29, 1939 edition of The Miner.
Bill Estes was attired in a red blouse and form-fitting red skirt. Very form-fitting. He wore a cute hat, which was all but lost in his elaborately curled hair, and was so altogether chic that one of the male onlookers announced that it would be quite possible for him to go for Bill in a big way. Ronald Paul's slender form was encased in a house dress, his sailor hat at a natty angle, and for convenience sake he wore the apron that he took to the club meeting to embroider, tied around his waist.
The future looked very bright. 2 stores advertised in The Miner. In addition to a wide variety of canned goods, fresh fruit and vegetables, and other staples, the Moose Pass store sold hardware, work clothes, camping and fishing gear, and drug sundries. Nelson's store also sold groceries, hardware, gasoline and oil, and many consumer goods. Moose Pass had one of the earliest schools on the Kenai Peninsula. Leora Roycroft was determined to have a school for her 5 sons, and in 1928 met the territorial minimum enrollment requirement by enlisting a child of a nearby railroad camp. In 1930, Anne Chisholm moved from Latouche Island in Prince William Sound and became the first teacher in Moose Pass. 10 students were enrolled in a one-room schoolhouse by 1935. By 1938, the community also boasted one of the earliest public libraries in Alaska. It was a modest start, as this July 21, 1939 issue of the Moose Pass Miner shows.
Membership cards for the Moose Pass Library are now on sale for $1 a year. The library will be open every Tuesday from 2 to 4 o'clock. 55 new books were purchased by the library board during the summer, and the membership fee plan will enable them to add more books from time to time.
Many of the library's first books came from the Latouche School when it closed in 1930. America's entry into World War II jolted the community. Mining and forestry jobs disappeared, and the local economy slumped. Men and families headed south to participate in the war or seek more promising economic opportunities. Many did not return. Economic activity slowly recovered after the war ended, but the promise of pre-war Moose Pass no longer glowed. Completion of the Seward Highway between 1948 and 1951, with paving completed in 1954, brought an influx of residents. The school population doubled and the store stayed open later, but the mini boom faded as the link was completed. The pioneering spirit of Moose Pass is best shown by one of its most notable early residents, Alaska Nellie. As a youngster, Nellie Trosper grew up in a Missouri farm and dreamed of Alaska, where game roamed in abundance. She trapped rabbits, skunks, and other small game, hunted, fished, and learned to handle all chores around the farm. She dropped out of school at 16 to take a job to help support her family, and later helped raise her younger siblings after her mother died. Nellie had many adventures as she slowly moved through mining towns on her way to Alaska. Drawn to Seward, where there was an opportunity with the building of the Alaska Railroad by the federal government, Nellie quickly found a job as a cook at a mine and a sawmill at Mile 26. That winter, Nellie showed she was as tough as any crusty sourdough. On December 3, 1915, Nellie left Seward on foot, pulling a sled with the most basic of supplies to establish a trapping line. She spent the dead of the winter alone in an abandoned cabin and caught fox, lynx, otter, mink, and rabbits. In the spring, Nellie pulled her sled the 26 miles to Seward, sold her furs, and a few days later started walking to Anchorage. After holing up at a Girdwood roadhouse for 10 days as a fierce snowstorm raged, she then turned around and walked back to Seward. She obtained a contract with the government to operate a roadhouse at Mile 45 and became an early successful businesswoman in Alaska. A miner retreating south for the winter left his 5 dogs and a fine dog sled. Nellie learned how to mush and was delighted when he didn't return. When a train was stalled a few miles away in a huge snowstorm, Nellie frantically made sandwiches, donuts, and coffee for 50 men, packed the food in a tub, and set off with the dog team to the rescue. The food and coffee rejuvenated the crew, which was then able to labor 18 hours to make the 7 miles to Nellie's roadhouse, where she fed and housed them overnight. Nellie added to her budding legend when she mushed to the rescue of a man carrying the U.S. mail who was trapped by a storm so fierce her dogs refused to move. She put on her snowshoes, broke trail, and led the team forward. She found the mail carrier frostbitten and unable to walk. She loaded him into her sled, freed his team from their harnesses so they could follow her, and headed to her roadhouse. She nursed his frostbite, fed him, and waited for the storm to abate. Early the next morning, she mushed to where she rescued the man, retrieved the mail, and took it and the injured mailman to the waiting train. In gratitude, a group of Seward old-timers sent her a Christmas gift of a necklace of gold nuggets with a diamond inset. Nellie started to build what would be the most impressive collection of big game trophies in the territory. Trophy brown bears, moose, and sheep she hunted and hauled home on her own. She later added to it in the coming years. As the railroad progressed, the contract for operating Nellie's roadhouse disappeared, and she went chasing gold in Girdwood. She invested in a mining venture that turned out to be a scam and even had a price on her head. She lost her investment but escaped with her life. She moved on with her small dog team to north of Talkeetna at the then terminus of the Alaska Railroad, where a large roadhouse was planned. Nellie started as a cook at Dead Horse Hill and ended up landing the contract to operate the roadhouse. Her trophy collection and fame grew. In addition to feeding as many as 150 workers and visitors a day, she hosted and charmed many dignitaries, including President Harding. As the railroad was completed and her roadhouse contract ended, she moved back to where she started in Alaska and where she wrote, "My dream comes true," on the shore of Kenai Lake. There were many other extraordinary characters in early Moose Pass, men and women who exhibited the Alaska spirit in many ways. Andy Simons immigrated from Finland in 1896 at the age of 16. He ended up on the Kenai Peninsula in 1908, where he was hired as a packer for a British Army officer. After the captain got his trophy moose and sheep, he was so impressed with the skills and knowledge of Simons that he recommended the governor grant him a guiding license. Simons quickly became the highly sought guide for European dignitaries, celebrities, politicians, business executives, and many regulars. Simon led hunts primarily in the North Kenai Corridor. A typical hunt with Simons involved 40 days of walking, hunting, and camping. He had very strong opinions on the ethics of hunting.
Wasting of meat is a sin. So is the hunting of heads if one does not utilize the food he kills. It takes just too many years to raise one head of big game to have some dude in high yellow boots mow it down with a 30-06 and do a war dance over a pile of horns and a scalp. The feller who toughens himself up to the top of some of these mountains and kills a doll ram or a goat has done something.
Simons was Alaska Game Commissioner for the Kenai Peninsula for 27 years. A 6,210-foot peak on the east side of Kenai Lake is named after him. His wife, Eva, was the daughter of Seward's first family of American settlers, Frank and Mary Lowell, who arrived in Resurrection Bay in 1884. She too has a mountain named after her, Mount Eva, which is within sight of the original Lowell homestead on the shore of Resurrection Bay in Seward. The Roycroft and Estes families played prominent roles in development of the community. The families built a sawmill powered by a water turbine or Pelton wheel. During the 1930s and early 1940s, the sawmill sold lumber for home construction, mines, and ties to the railroad, and even shipped lumber to Anchorage on the railroad. The mill operated until World War II, when the family members left for military service or civilian work elsewhere. Not all members of the two families left forever. The Estes family took over the last remaining grocery store in 1945 and installed gasoline pumps. The Estes Brothers store still is the only one in the community. The Esteses also provided Moose Pass with its first electricity. The first came through the Pelton wheel. The service was at first sporadic and weak, but it beat kerosene lamps and candles. The power improved when the Esteses installed a diesel generator. By 1940, the Esteses also powered Helio's Roadhouse, the store, the school, and some residences. The Estes family operated the power as a public facility until the mid-1950s, when it was bought by Chugach Electric Association. The Estes family patriarch, Ed Estes, was 10 when he came to Moose Pass in 1921 after his stepfather got a job on the railroad. In later years, he became known as the honorary mayor of Moose Pass. In the late 1930s, Ed had the winter mail run between Moose Pass and Hope. This meant mushing over the Resurrection Pass Trail, which involves 2,600 feet of elevation gain and 38 miles of a rough trail. To deal with the elements, he built an enclosed sled with stove inside and pulled it behind his dog sled for passengers. Family members say Ed also figured out how to steer the sled from inside the small enclosure during bitterly cold rides. He later joined the Army and helped build the railroad tunnel to Whittier, and returned to Moose Pass to become a firefighter, crane operator, and community leader. Ed always carried a small potato in his pocket for good luck and health. A replica of the Pelton wheel is still turning, and is an important attraction to passing motorists. The wheel now powers a large grinding stone. A hand-drawn sign proclaims, "Moose Pass is a peaceful little town. If you have an axe to grind, do it here." Another colorful character was Kenneth Condit, who was born in Wyoming in 1909 and arrived in Moose Pass in 1940 with his wife and 5-year-old son. While he held many jobs as a hunting guide, railroad gandy dancer, and road builder, his first love was trapping. He lived in the very cold winters in the barest of shelters and conveniences. Here's how he described his early years of trapping in a 2004 interview in the Anchorage Daily News.
Living in a tent wasn't too bad. I made a camp stove out of 2 gas cans, just jammed them together so it was big enough for a coffee pot and skillet, and it worked real fine.
He did comment on the cold winters, but didn't complain.
In the old days, it would stay 30 and 40 below month after month.
As someone who moved to the wilderness to be close to nature, he really loathed the notion of a road connection to Anchorage.
One thing we never lacked was black bears. If you wanted a black bear, around the 10th of May, you would get in your old pickup, drive out the road to mile 34, and usually there'd be 4 or 5 blackies out there. Moose Pass was a real good place to live, especially our first 11 years. Then in 1951, they built the Seward Highway and turned Anchorage loose on us. Since then, things have never been the same.
Since the earliest days, a trait that has always defined Moose Pass has been an independent spirit and an interest in working together. Here's how Ann Painter, a former journalist and longtime Moose Pass resident, described it in the 1983 book, A Larger History of the Kenai Peninsula.
Community spirit and participation has always been strong in Moose Pass. Funds have been raised to buy books for the library and to build the new community hall, constructed in 1961. To raise money for the hall, people were asked to buy the bricks used to build the hall. The bricks cost 21 cents each and were trucked by Ed Estes from Soldotna at no cost. An exact diagram of the hall was posted and people wrote their name on the bricks they were paying for. The hall was built largely with donated labor. A mason from outside Moose Pass donated his labor on the weekends for a place to stay. Local resident Vera Wolf said that for a while it looked like the hall would never get done before winter. Workers would show up on weekend mornings to work but never returned from lunch breaks at home. To solve this, lunch was provided to keep the workers on the job site.
This community experience is alive and well today. A recent example was the conversion of the old fire hall into new quarters for the library. Bruce Jaffa, owner of a successful North Slope service community, volunteered to be project manager and mustered a large crew of local residents to donate their time. While a state grant provided most of the funds, Jaffa logged more than 1,000 hours of volunteer labor towards the project. The skills of the volunteer laborers ranged from journeymen to floor sweepers, but the community involvement was significant. The best example of how this spirit survives is the annual Moose Pass Summer Solstice Festival. The proceeds of this roadside event funds local governance and services, such as the operation of the community hall, educational scholarships for local residents, and a support for the volunteer fire department, school, library, and other community services. The amount of volunteer hours involved in planning, organizing a large volunteer army, and pulling it off is incredible. Sean McDonald is a Moose Pass artist who donates bronze art as a solstice raffle prize each year, and he has been a leader for many years in organizing the Summer Solstice Festival. From the days of the nomadic Alaska Native inhabitants Moose Pass has undergone many changes, but the spirit of early settlers can still be felt to this day. This video is an effort of the Moose Pass Public Library to preserve local history and share it with others.